Some women believe in fairy tales. To them, men are white knights. But it's a fantasy doomed to fail.
I think you might be a bad girl.
When a party girl is dumped, the good times are over.
She said to him, "You're a dead man."
Have a wonderful day, sir.
Climbing the social ladder comes at a lethal cost.
More money, more social status. It was all about greed.
Your ex has been calling you?
And a clingy girlfriend refuses to be separated.
The only way to end that pain was to kill the source of the pain.
Take a dangerous temper.
You're an idiot.
Dr. Anderson told people he was scared for his life.
Add a dangerous liaison.
She just lashed out at him. Very animalistic.
You get a lethal combination.
Together, they were a stick of dynamite with a lit fuse.
Texas, fall 2012. In Houston's upscale museum district,
Hi there, cutie pie.
43-year-old Anna Trujillo is doing what she does best,
Straight vodka, cheers.
having a good time.
She was extremely talkative. She would approach people. She liked to go out. She liked to party. She liked to go to nice restaurants.
Divorcee Anna chooses big city life over caring for her 2 children. She leaves them with their grandma back in small town Waco.
She moved to Houston away from her children and started living the party lifestyle.
You're cute. Aren't you gonna buy a girl a drink?
Flirtatious Anna is drawn to another lone drinker. New to town and single, 59-year-old medical researcher Dr. Stefan Anderson.
Dr. Stefan Anderson was a PhD medical researcher, well-respected professional. People describe him as a very nice guy, mild-mannered.
He had a great sense of humor. He was a very intelligent man.
A love of drink is something Anna and Stefan have in common.
He was a functional alcoholic. He did drink every single day.
He drank a little too much sometimes, but when he did, he would just get mellow.
This theory is right. It could be a very important breakthrough.
Early days yet, though.
Here's hoping.
Romance quickly blossoms, and the couple become inseparable.
Several years of research still planned.
Anna and Stefan's relationship started out, as many relationships do, just fine. It quickly turned to romance. They moved in together.
They make an unlikely duo,
Let's go have some fun.
the PhD and the party girl.
I think he was attracted to her spirit and her quirkiness. He also had a history of trying to fix people and seeing the good in people.
She's different, all right.
Full of life. What I need.
They were not a good match from the very beginning. Dr. Anderson's friends told us that they really kind of cautioned him to stay away from her.
Stefan's friends are right to be wary. Anna isn't always the picture of poise.
When she mixed alcohol in her system, she became extremely violent.
Drunk Anna takes on anyone in her path,
Man.
Off of me.
even a security guard.
Miss Trujillo had been intoxicated inside of her place of business after hours. He was telling her that she could not stay there. She attacks him. She grabs the back of his hair and starts pulling it and then hitting him in the face.
Stefan soon learns to fear Anna's dark side.
Hello, darling.
Where have you been?
I met some friends.
What's that for? Stop that now!
Anna Trujillo, on the surface, was a very bubbly, friendly, happy person.
I hate you! You're no better than the others.
Underneath, I think that she was very angry. And so when Anna Trujillo would drink excessively, that anger would come out and it would manifest itself in violence.
Anna's physical threats escalate.
Dr. Anderson told people he was scared for his life.
It's the final straw. After 6 tumultuous months, the relationship is over.
Stefan, I'm sorry.
When she started getting more violent, he ended the relationship. He was afraid of where it was going.
I want you to move out.
Well, I have nowhere to go.
It's an unorthodox living arrangement, but it works. Until another drunken rage gets Anna in trouble again.
When is she leaving?
I'll talk to her.
Are you talking about me?
No, Anna.
She bends down and has her lips puckered like she's gonna kiss. And instead, she comes down with her mouth open and bites the top of his head.
James's girlfriend has to beat her off with a broom.
When animals fight, they bite. Their teeth are weapons. They use them to subdue their enemy. And so did Anna.
Anna's welcome is well and truly worn out.
You're a dead man.
She returns to Stefan, begging him for a place to stay.
Please, Stefan. Just a few days.
Anna assures it will be a short stay.
Until I can go back home.
She plans to return to Waco to live with her family.
I can't tolerate violence.
Of course. I promise I'll be good.
Stefan, being the kind person he is, couldn't turn her away.
Okay.
Thank you, Stefan.
He did not want her in his life, but he felt sorry for her because she had been kicked out
You won't regret this.
and she has nowhere to go.
But his kindness won't be repaid.
He was late middle age and dealing with a problem with alcohol. She was looking for love and she had an alcohol problem. Together, they were a stick of dynamite with a lit fuse.
Houston, Texas, June 9th, 2013.
Come on. 1, 2, 3.
It's Anna Trujillo's last night in the city. Out of work and nowhere to live, she's returning to her hometown, Waco. Her ex-boyfriend, Dr. Stefan Anderson, takes her out for a farewell dinner.
They had dinner together and were there for several hours.
Have some service.
Sorry, I think you had enough.
I want another drink.
Anna, time to leave.
Oh, get off me.
Dr. Anderson, 3 different times, tries to get Anna Trujillo to leave the bar because the cab is outside waiting.
Eventually, Stefan manages to get Anna home.
Where the hell did you get your license from?
But her mood is getting worse.
Shut up.
Anna became angry, belligerent, and disrespectful to Dr. Anderson in the cab.
I'm sorry.
She was unruly, she was belligerent, she was cursing out.
Your friend, she's out of control.
Anna's behavior is so aggressive. The cab driver, a stranger, offers to pray for Stefan's safety.
She was worried about Dr. Anderson, that Anna was out of control and that something really, really bad was going to happen.
Stefan laughs off the cab driver's concerns. But upstairs, it's a different story.
You're a disgrace.
He was mortified at her behavior.
How dare you judge me?
Just get out.
He came upstairs and told her that she couldn't stay there.
Anna is already spoiling for a fight.
She was very angry that the lifestyle she had was being taken away from her, and she just lashed out at him, very animalistic. He was on his back, face up, and she was on top of him. She struck him in the head with the heel of her shoe.
All he had to do to stop the attack was give Anna one heck of a slap or even a fist to her face, and she would have been down. But he didn't do that. Dr. Anderson was a nice guy.
Anna stabs Stefan 25 times.
I don't know if she was trying to just obliterate the person in front of her or if she was just in a blind rage and just swinging.
She could have stopped at any time, gotten up, and walked away.
She was compelled by rage.
At 3:45 a.m.,
I want to report an assault.
Anna calls 911.
My boyfriend, he attacked me.
Anna Trujillo's voice is slurred. She originally reports that she's being attacked and that she needs help.
For police, there's no question that Anna killed Stefan.
Well, he attacked me. It wasn't my fault.
But she claims self-defense.
Anna's story at trial was that he attacked her and that he got her in a bear hug, and that basically he was choking her from behind and that she repeatedly had to hit him in the face with the shoe to get him to let go. Now, that wasn't consistent with the physical evidence.
The evidence clearly indicates Anna straddles Stefan, and she doesn't have a mark on her from the alleged attack.
We couldn't find anywhere that she'd been punched, anywhere she'd been kicked, no bruising, and no blood.
Most damning of all is the number of times she pummeled Stefan with her stiletto.
Hitting someone 25 times in the head with a sharp object is 24 times too many for it to be called self-defense.
An investigation into Anna's life reveals her bad habit of attacking men.
She would go for their face, hitting and biting. Some see it as an attempt to obliterate the person.
In April 2014, Anna Trujillo is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. No chance of parole for at least 30 years.
This was not even close to self-defense. This was a brutal, vicious murder.
Anna brutally beat to death a man who never raised a hand to her, not even in his last moment.
We talked to all the witnesses in Dr. Anderson's life and in Anna Trujillo's life. The one thing that came back was that Dr. Anderson was the victim and that Anna Trujillo was the aggressor.
But to this day, Anna claims she is the victim.
It's not a murder Anna Trujillo can walk away from.
When ambition takes hold,
Have a wonderful day, sir.
Housework really wasn't what she was interested in.
improving one life
More money, more social status. It was all about basic greed.
Have some water to wash it down.
can mean ending another.
Murder was so much easier.
Flora, Illinois, 1908. A small agricultural town with few opportunities for an ambitious woman.
Essie's first job was working as a housekeeper for a married couple.
26-year-old Essie Cope makes the most of being a domestic.
My, scrumptious.
Why, thank you. Pleasure's all mine.
And affluent businessman Havel Bible and wife Molly are kind employers. The job gives Essie the means to leave her past behind.
Essie married very young and had 3 children rather quickly, but then decided that wasn't the life she wanted, and she deserted her entire family.
For a woman to run off and leave her children was just unheard of because women just didn't do those sorts of things, which just goes to reinforce the fact that Essie was very cold and she really had no emotional bond with her children.
It's definitely a case where she didn't think the rules applied to her wasn't that high, particularly in rural areas.
Essie! Essie!
What is it?
It doesn't take long for Molly to succumb to illness.
A lot of people died young during that period of time, from diseases or whatever.
Havel is shattered, but Essie is there to keep his house in order.
I'll look after you now.
And to offer more than a shoulder to cry on.
Housework really wasn't what she was interested in.
Soon, she and Havel begin living together as husband and wife, in all but name.
In the 1920s, women just didn't move in with men. It was not acceptable behavior.
This was very scandalous for the 20s. But Essie beat to her own drum. She didn't care what society thought.
Essie may not care for propriety.
Yes. I have a summons for you.
But the Illinois law at the time does. Living in sin is illegal.
Immoral conduct.
Yes, sir.
Havel Bible got fined by the Clay County court system for Essie living with him.
Upsetting the Puritans, are we?
She didn't care. She flaunted convention at every turn.
Let's shut them up. Let's get married.
In 1914, Essie advances from hired help to beloved wife.
They got married, and they seemed to be very happy. She bore him a son that they named Floyd.
Almost a decade later, Essie has a chance encounter with a man from her past, Ernest Malinsky.
Mr. Malinsky, what a wonderful surprise.
Lovely to see you too, Essie.
Ernest was an engineer with the B&O Railroad, and he had a lot of social status.
This is my wife, Laura.
He had a good sense of humor. He had a great personality. Everybody in the community loved him.
We've moved into our new place.
Some reports say that Essie met Ernest when she was only 16. But it would take another 28 years before Essie ran into Ernest again.
Must come around sometime.
I'd love to.
We'd love to see you.
The old friends are delighted to see each other after so long. Within weeks of running into Ernest, there's trouble at home. Havel is bedridden by a common killer of the day, pneumonia.
Nobody thought that there was anything wrong with her. They just thought he died of an illness. There was no questions asked.
The loss of her husband means the loss of her income.
To better herself, better her circumstances, her social status.
Essie was a woman on a mission.
Flora, Illinois, 1925. Recent widow, Essie Bible, finds work with old friend Ernest Malinsky and his wife, Laura.
Laura was a very well-respected woman of the community. She was well-liked.
I'm feeling rather poorly. A refreshment will perk you up.
Essie hasn't been part of the household long when Laura falls ill. Once again, Essie is thrust into the role of nursemaid. For weeks, she cares for Laura, but to no avail.
At the end of 8 weeks of tremendous suffering and pain, Laura passes on.
Doctors think Laura's the victim of food poisoning.
When Laura passed away, the local doctor said, she died of ptomaine poisoning from eating bad watermelon.
The door was open for Essie.
Now both widowed, romance between Ernest and Essie ignites.
Mr. Malinsky didn't have a period of mourning.
Only 6 weeks after Laura's death, they marry.
The fact that Essie and Ernest Malinsky married 6 weeks after Laura's death set the whole neighborhood afire with indignation. They started piecing things together. They got suspicious of Laura did not get sick till Essie moved in with them, and the neighbors really raised a fuss.
The neighbors were so offended at this that it spawned an investigation into Laura's death.
They got the coroner to dig up Laura's body, and they sent it to St. Louis for an investigation as to what really killed her.
The autopsy reveals the shocking cause of Laura's death. Murder.
The chemist determined that she had been poisoned with arsenic.
Police arrest the newlywed.
You are suspected of the murder of Laura Malinsky.
Yes. I killed her. Ernest is a fine man. He deserved better.
As if it is a relief, Essie confesses to murder. All 3 of them.
Can you tell me about the death of Marlene Havenbible?
They say confession is good for the soul, and it certainly was for Essie.
I killed them both.
She couldn't stop confessing, and she revealed what she had done to her 2 previous victims.
I killed Molly to be with Havel. Then I killed Havel to be with Ernest.
Essie is a serial social climber, using murder for each rung.
But not Mrs. Malinsky. Her death took 6 to 8 weeks. I think Essie was enjoying it.
Essie only stands trial for the murder of Laura Malinsky. In March 1926, she is sentenced to life.
The judge at the time said that if she had been a man, he would have hanged her. Essie had her sights set on a man that could give her a better status in life, more money, more social status. It was all about basic greed, I think.
After serving 25 years in prison, Essie is released.
Essie was supposed to spend the rest of her life in prison, but she was released when she was in her early 60s. She lived to be 98 years old. Maybe it's true, only the good die young.
When new love blossoms,
he fit her like a slipper, a perfect slipper.
It can sometimes take root.
Can you come over?
He said she just won't leave me alone. She calls, she harasses him all the time.
You're gonna get back with her, aren't you?
And choke everything around it.
She was suffocating the life right out of him with all her neediness.
The small fishing town of Waldoboro, Maine, known for its great seafood, particularly the lobster.
I'm hungry.
The spring of 2012, Arlene Lawless is feasting on the local catch. 34-year-old fisherman, Normie Benner.
He worked as a fisherman, the lobster fisherman. He was a stern man, and he clam digger. He liked working outside.
He's a breath of fresh air for Arlene after a rough past.
Arlene did get in trouble with the law from time to time.
She had some aggressive behaviors. She also had some defiance. Her ability to get along with people sometimes, I think, was difficult for her.
Arlene's roommate, Jeremy, finds her difficult at times.
Let's eat.
But Normie gets along with everyone.
He was always friendly, and he attracted a lot of people because he wasn't judgmental. He would just accept anybody for who they was. So he had a lot of different friends, different kind of people.
When Normie brings Arlene home to meet his parents and sister, they're not so accepting.
My first impression was not good because she had tattoos all over her, and she just seemed weird to me.
Dawn also realizes Arlene has been hurting herself.
She said, yes, I used to cut myself. I could see the scars on her legs.
It's a sign of a distressed individual. Don't screw with me, I'm full of rage. It's a warning. It's a yellow flashing light.
I want you to know that I love Normie.
Normie's girlfriend seems very serious for a brand new beau.
You've only known me for a week.
Still, I know.
Arlene told me how she loved Normie. He was the best thing she ever knew. Said, you've only known him a week, Arlene. And she said, I still know. She said, I'd never do anything to hurt your son or your family.
Here's one you'll love.
No, I won't. I can't stand horror.
Despite his family's reservations, Normie starts seeing more of this wild woman.
They're casually dating, except it was actually only Norman that was casually dating. For Arlene, it was serious.
Arlene thinks she's found the man of her dreams.
Norman was the one. He fit her like a slipper, a perfect slipper.
She had told people that she hoped that the two would get married.
So then Jeff says, bring in those damn lobsters.
When she's not with Normie, Arlene still can't let go.
Hey, Arlene.
You can't even leave him alone for 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, fine. See you tomorrow. Bye. Oh, where was I? Oh, so he's hanging over the side.
He said, she just won't leave me alone. She harasses him all the time.
Happy-go-lucky Normie is starting to feel stifled.
Gotta get out of this relationship.
Well, there's something odd about that gal.
Norman became aware very early on, in the only 2 or 3 months they were dating, that this was not the woman for him, that she was too clingy and needy, and he told this to people.
By midsummer, Arlene senses her boyfriend's cooling emotions.
Are you gonna leave me?
He said she's really saying weird things. She wakes me up in the night saying, are you gonna leave me?
Your ex has been calling you?
Arlene.
You're gonna go back with her, aren't you?
Just go back to sleep.
She was sort of closing in on him and suffocating the life right out of him with all her neediness.
Daybreak on July 21st, 2012. It's the weekend, but Normie has an early start.
He left Saturday morning very early, as a fisherman would. He was going to go haul lobsters on his boat.
Arlene is also up early, reaching out to Normie.
She called his phone that day, like, I don't know how many times it kept going off. He left it home, and she kept leaving him messages and messages.
When she can't contact Normie, her game playing is the last straw for Normie.
I'm gonna break up with her.
He summons the courage to sever all ties and prepares a peace offering.
Probably be an hour.
He was actually cooking some lobsters.
Sure thing.
He was going to go over, have lobster with her, and attempt to terminate that relationship.
I don't mind being a chauffeur.
Dawn is worried about her son.
He thought he was so big and strong that he could handle anything, I think.
Her fears are well-founded. Normie is on a collision course with a dangerous woman.
He said, I hope to be home in an hour.
Normie is not back in an hour. He is not back in a day.
But we didn't hear from him, so we just waited. Sunday night, I said, something's really wrong.
Waldoboro, Maine. Monday morning, July 23rd, 2012.
Probably be an hour.
2 days earlier, Normie Benner went to break up with girlfriend Arlene Lawless. But he doesn't return home.
Sunday, and we hadn't heard from him. So I told his father, I said, something's wrong, I know.
Normie's mother, Dawn, and sister, Kimberly, drive to Arlene's home.
I said, I'm scared, Kimmy. I don't even want to go in there.
I haven't seen either of them.
Normie, honey? Wake up.
See Normie laying at the foot of the bed, and I said, Normie.
Oh, he's dead.
Kimmy felt him. She said, he's dead, Ma. He's stiff. He's dead.
Normie has been shot in the head. Arlene lies lifeless beside him.
They were sure both of them were dead.
Run, Kimmy, run!
Then, like something out of a zombie movie, Arlene rose up.
I said, run, Kimmy, because I thought she had a gun. She was still alive. And so we jumped in the cab, and we drove down and called 911. And we...
Arlene's rushed to the hospital with a facial wound. She tells her story to the police.
So yummy.
2 days earlier, on Saturday night, she and Normie have their last supper.
Arlene, you know I care about you. I just don't want commitment right now.
She persuaded him to stay at the house.
Arlene is preparing a little surprise of her own. She steals her housemate's gun.
She had gone up into his room and taken a handgun from under his mattress, that she knew it would be there, she knew it would be loaded.
Arlene decides to end this relationship on her own terms.
Arlene was terrified that Norman was going to leave her for another woman, and she couldn't bear the thought of it.
Arlene had put the gun in close range to the back of his head and pulled the trigger.
And then she was so angry about the whole situation. She said she wanted to kill herself. After the shot, she laid down next to Normie. And that's where she was found 2 days later.
In June 2013, Arlene Lawless pleads guilty to the murder of Normie Benner. She is sentenced to 35 years in prison.
I think life for life is what you should get.
Norman's family needed justice. I'm not sure they got it.
You're gonna go back with her, aren't you?
Arlene couldn't bear to be alone.
No, just try and sleep, please.
Her neediness destroyed a gentle soul, too kind to break a woman's heart.
It was a big part of a lot of people's lives, and there is a noticeable hole in the Benner family.
Dawn will never forget the final phone call she receives from her son's killer.
I said, "You killed my son?" She said, "Yes, I did." I said, "You know you ripped our world apart." She said, "I know I did." Arlene, you did rip our world apart, but you can't take our memories. We love our son, and you cannot take that away from us. We're a close family, and you're not ripping us apart.
When these deadly women felt let down, their love turned lethal. Anna Trujillo's violent temper finally took a life. Essie Bible Malinsky turned social climbing into serial murder. And Arlene Lawless played out a love tragedy. Friends and loved ones suffered when these women revealed their hidden rage.
It begins with the sound of boots on frozen pavement, a narrow street in West Berlin before dawn, sodium lights flickering like tired eyes, and a single apartment window still glowing while the rest of the building sleeps, because inside that room, time has stopped, and no one knows it yet. The call comes in just after 6, a neighbor reporting a smell, metallic and wrong, drifting through the stairwell, the kind that doesn't belong to morning coffee or damp concrete. And when police push the door open, they find a scene that refuses to explain itself, a woman lying where she fell. Coat still on, handbag untouched, blood dried dark against the floor as if the room itself has been holding its breath all night. Her name is Karen Vogel. She is 32. She works at a small publishing house near Kurfürstendamm. She missed a meeting the day before. No forced entry. No sign of struggle. A life interrupted mid-sentence. Outside, the city wakes up, unaware that another mystery has just been added to its bones. Berlin in 1982 is a city split not just by walls but by nerves, a place where secrets feel normal and silence feels safer than truth, where everyone watches everyone else and no one admits it. The wall cuts the horizon like a scar. Sirens echo longer here. Rumors travel faster than facts. When word spreads that a woman has been found dead in her flat with no clear cause, the community stiffens, shopkeepers whisper, neighbors avoid eye contact, and the tabloids sharpen their knives. Mysterious death in Charlottenburg apartment. Police baffled. Another Berlin cold case in the making. The phrase lands early and sticks. Cold case. Unanswered. Unfinished. The kind of story Berlin knows too well. Detectives walk the apartment inch by inch. The furniture is modest, neat. Books stacked by the bed. A kettle on the stove, cold. A calendar on the wall, yesterday circled in red ink. No fingerprints that don't belong. No weapon in sight. The autopsy will later confirm blunt force trauma, but the object? Unknown. The timing? Somewhere between early evening and midnight. The windows are closed. The locks intact. It's as if the killer stepped out of the shadows, did what they came to do, and dissolved back into the city without leaving a name behind. Experienced officers exchange looks they don't put into reports. This one is going to be hard. They start where they always do. Friends. Colleagues. Lovers. Karen is described as quiet, reliable, not the kind of person who attracts trouble. She edits manuscripts. She drinks white wine. She jogs on Sundays. Her co-workers say she seemed distracted lately, but then again, who wasn't? Berlin was a pressure cooker. One friend mentions a man she'd been seeing, casually, nothing serious. Another recalls an argument overheard at a cafe weeks earlier, voices low but tense. Names are written down, alibis checked. Nothing sticks. The man from the cafe is questioned, released. The casual boyfriend swears he was home all night, and someone backs him up. The list of possibilities grows thinner by the day. Then there are the neighbors. Someone heard footsteps on the stairs around 9. Someone else heard nothing at all. One woman insists she saw a figure leaving the building, tall, wearing a dark coat, but in Berlin, in winter, that description fits half the city. A man on the ground floor reports a power flicker around 10, lights blinking once, then steady again, a detail that seems important until it doesn't. Every statement adds shape to the fog without clearing it. Detectives pin photos to a board. Draw lines. Erase them. The case file thickens. The answers do not. Weeks turn into months. The newspapers lose interest, as they always do, chasing the next shock, the next headline. Karen's face fades from the front pages to the inside columns, then disappears entirely. For the investigators, though, the pressure never really lifts. Every cold case begins warm, with heat and urgency and the illusion that persistence alone will crack it. But as leads dry up, the case cools, slowly, imperceptibly, until one day it is officially labeled what everyone already knows. Unsolved. A cold case added to the archives, boxed, shelved, and left to gather dust beneath decades of other unanswered questions. Berlin moves on. The wall still stands. Years pass. The publishing house closes. The building where Karen died is repainted, renovated, rented out to new tenants who never ask why the walls feel heavy at night. Detectives retire. Files are transferred, misfiled, forgotten. But cold cases have a way of lingering, like a low-frequency hum you don't notice until the room goes quiet. Somewhere in the system, Karen Vogel's name remains, ink on paper, waiting. And then, almost without warning, something shifts. Not in 1983. Not in 1990, when the wall comes down and the city rewrites itself. Not even in the chaos of reunification, when records are lost and histories blur. The shift comes much later, quietly, in a windowless room where a younger investigator flips through old files not because he expects a miracle, but because cold cases are assigned, and someone has to read them. He notices a detail that was always there but never loud enough to demand attention. An evidence log. An item marked inconclusive. A trace collected from the apartment floor, preserved but never fully analyzed by the standards of the time. Back then, technology had limits. Now, it doesn't. The file is reopened without ceremony. No press release. No promises. Just a request to the lab. Test it again. Run it through modern systems. See what comes back. Days stretch. Weeks. The lab finally responds with a result that makes the investigator sit up straighter. A partial profile. Incomplete, but real. Enough to ask another question. Enough to wake the case from its long sleep. This is how cold cases unravel, not with explosions, but with whispers. A forgotten sample. A margin note. A decision to look again when everyone else has stopped looking. The investigator tracks down old witnesses, now older, slower, some reluctant to revisit a past they've spent years trying to forget. Memories have softened, shifted, but guilt and fear age differently. One former neighbor hesitates before answering a question she once dismissed. Another corrects a detail she's been repeating for decades. The timeline begins to flex. Not break. Flex. A name resurfaces. Not new. Not dramatic. Just familiar enough to sting. Someone who was questioned briefly in 1982 and cleared with a thin alibi that no one thought to challenge. Someone who left Berlin not long after the murder, drifting west, then south, leaving little behind but paperwork. Back then it meant nothing. People moved. People disappeared. Now, with fresh eyes and sharper tools, it means everything. The investigator requests records. Employment histories. Addresses. A DNA comparison, if possible. The system churns. The past resists. Files are incomplete. Names are misspelled. But persistence is a kind of pressure, and slowly, pieces begin to surface. A job application with a signature. A medical record. A trace that can be compared. Each document feels like a small betrayal of the silence that protected the truth for so long. Word begins to leak. A cold case reopened. A possible breakthrough. Journalists circle cautiously, burned too many times by false hope. But when they hear the year, 1982, and the city, Berlin, and the phrase long-lost evidence, their interest sharpens. This isn't just another murder. This is history knocking on the present, demanding to be heard. The community that once whispered now listens. Old neighbors read the articles with a jolt of recognition. Karen's name returns to print, unfamiliar to a generation that never knew her, painfully vivid to those who did. For the investigator, the weight is personal now. Cold cases are not puzzles. They are unfinished conversations with the dead. Every step forward carries the risk of disappointment, the fear that the evidence will crumble under scrutiny, that the whisper will fade back into silence. But there is momentum, a sense that the city itself is leaning in, holding its breath the way that apartment once did on a winter night in 1982. The lab calls again. The comparison is not perfect, but it is close enough to justify the next move. A door that has been closed for decades is about to be knocked on. Somewhere, a man who believed the past was buried deep enough is about to learn that Berlin remembers. Cold cases don't forgive time. They wait. And this one has been waiting a very long time. The knock comes in the late afternoon, the kind that carries weight even before the door opens, firm, deliberate, practiced, and when the man on the other side finally answers, older now, grayer, heavier around the eyes. There is a flicker of something that passes across his face too quickly to name, not surprise exactly, not fear, but recognition, as if a ghost has learned how to ring doorbells. He gives his name without being asked. He listens without interrupting. He invites them in. The apartment smells of stale coffee and old paper. Life has been lived here, quietly, without headlines. The investigator watches his hands as he talks. They don't shake. Not yet. They tell him why they're here in careful, neutral sentences, the language of procedure, of routine, of nothing personal, Even though everything about this is personal, because the past has a way of shrinking distances and 1982 suddenly feels uncomfortably close. He nods along, offers dates, places, a version of himself that fits neatly into the years after Berlin, after Karen, after the night that refuses to stay buried. He says he barely remembers her. A colleague's friend. A few conversations. Nothing more. The investigator lets the silence stretch, because silence is where people fill in gaps they didn't know were visible. When they mention the evidence, the long-lost sample, his eyes narrow just a fraction, a muscle tightening near the jaw, gone almost immediately, but enough. He asks what kind of evidence. They don't answer. Not yet. Instead, they ask where he was the night Karen Vogel died. He gives the same answer he gave decades ago, a night at home, alone. Nothing remarkable, the kind of alibi that dissolves the moment you try to hold it. Back then, that was enough. Back then, no one pushed. Now the room feels smaller. They leave without an arrest, without raised voices, without drama. Just a handshake, polite, almost friendly, and the unspoken understanding that the conversation is not over. Outside, the investigator exhales slowly, the way you do when you've been underwater longer than you realized. This is how pressure builds, not with confrontation, but with inevitability. The file grows heavier. The past grows louder. Back at the station, the case spreads out across a table like a map of a city that no longer exists. Old photographs, black and white, faces frozen in expressions that belong to another era. Handwritten notes from detectives who are no longer alive. Margins filled with question marks. And now, new printouts, clean, precise, modern, speaking a language the old files never could. The partial DNA profile sits at the center, unassuming, powerful, waiting to be connected to something solid. The investigator requests surveillance records from the area around Karen's building, not because he expects miracles, but because time has changed what we keep and how long we keep it. A nearby shop once had a camera pointed at the street, grainy, unreliable, but archived. The footage is reviewed frame by frame, hours of nothing punctuated by moments of possibility. A figure passing under a streetlight, a pause at the entrance, a shape that could be anyone, or someone specific if you wanted badly enough. Witnesses are re-interviewed, their lives now layered with decades of distance. One neighbor admits she lied about the time she went to bed, embarrassed by the real reason. Another remembers hearing voices, not raised, not violent, but urgent, a conversation that didn't belong to a stranger. These are small shifts, barely perceptible, but cold cases don't turn on confessions. They turn on accumulation, on the slow erosion of certainty. The media catches the scent. An article appears, cautious but sharp, revisiting the murder with fresh language and old photographs. Karen's face stares out again, younger than she ever got to be, eyes fixed on a future she never reached. Breakthrough in Berlin cold case. The headline asks, careful to include the question mark, but bold enough to reignite interest. The community reacts in waves. Some are angry that the wound is being reopened. Others feel a strange relief. At least someone is still asking why. The man who answered the door reads the article in his kitchen alone. He folds the paper neatly when he's done. He doesn't throw it away. He sits for a long time, staring at nothing. Somewhere, a decision is forming, though he doesn't know it yet. The lab work continues. The partial profile is run against databases that didn't exist in the 80s, systems built on the assumption that nothing truly disappears. There are near matches, then exclusions, a process as frustrating as it is precise. Each negative result feels like a door closing. Each near hit feels like a breath held too long. The investigator learns patience the hard way, trusting that the system will eventually say yes or no, and that either answer will change everything. In the meantime, financial records are examined. Karen's bank statements show nothing unusual, no large withdrawals, no mysterious deposits. But there is a pattern of small payments, regular, almost rhythmic, to a service that no longer exists. A private courier. At the time, it meant little. Now, it raises a question. What was she sending? To whom? And why did it stop so abruptly? A retired courier is tracked down, living on the outskirts of the city, surprised to be remembered at all. He recalls Karen vaguely, a polite woman, careful with her words, always asking if deliveries could be made discreetly. Packages. Envelopes. He never looked inside. He gives an address from memory, a place that no longer stands, demolished in the wave of post-wall development. Another dead end, except for the fact that the address appears once more in the file, linked to the same man who answered the door. Coincidence is a word investigators learn to distrust. The pressure increases subtly. Another visit. Another conversation. This time, the questions are sharper. The pauses longer. The man's answers begin to fray at the edges, small inconsistencies slipping through. He contradicts himself about dates, about how well he knew Karen, about why he left Berlin so suddenly. Nothing explosive. Nothing that would make for a dramatic arrest. Just enough to justify the next step. A request is made. Voluntary. A DNA sample. The man hesitates. Just a moment. Just enough. He asks if it's necessary. The investigator explains calmly that it would help eliminate him, clear his name once and for all. The words hang there, heavy with implication. Clear your name. He agrees. He always planned to agree. The sample is taken. Labeled. Sent away. Waiting becomes a character in its own right. Days stretch thin. The investigator dreams of files and corridors, of doors that open onto other doors. Karen's name echoes in his thoughts, no longer just a victim, but a presence, a question that refuses to be quiet. He wonders how many lives have been shaped by that winter night without ever knowing it. How many choices bent slightly because something unresolved lingered in the background. When the result finally comes, it doesn't arrive with a siren or a shout. It arrives in an email, clinical, precise, devastating in its restraint. The match is not absolute, but it is strong. Strong enough to warrant a warrant. Strong enough to move from suspicion to action. The investigator reads it twice, then a third time, making sure the words don't change. They don't. The arrest is scheduled quietly early morning, the way these things are done when the goal is truth, not spectacle. But word leaks anyway. It always does. Cameras gather at a distance. Reporters murmur into microphones. The man is led out of his building in handcuffs, his face carefully blank, as if expression itself could be used against him. The city watches, stunned, unsure whether to feel vindicated or betrayed by time. Interrogation rooms haven't changed much. Neutral colors. Hard chairs. The hum of fluorescent lights. The man sits across from the investigator, older than Karen ever got to be, carrying the weight of decades that suddenly feel fragile. He denies everything at first, as expected, leaning on the habits that have protected him for so long. But the evidence is placed in front of him piece by piece, not rushed, not theatrical. The DNA, the address, the courier, the inconsistencies. Each one lands with a dull thud. Hours pass, then more. The man's voice grows hoarse. His confidence erodes. At some point, he stops denying and starts explaining, a subtle but irreversible shift. He talks about Berlin, about fear, about choices made in moments that felt small at the time. He doesn't confess.
Not yet.
But the shape of the truth begins to emerge, uneven, incomplete, dangerous. Outside, the story explodes. Suspect arrested in Berlin 1982 cold case. Long-lost evidence changes everything. The headlines scream, what the investigation whispers. For the community, it is both an ending and a beginning, a reopening of wounds they thought had scarred over. For the investigator, it is a reminder that cold cases don't die. They wait. And when they move again, they move fast. Somewhere in the city, a file is no longer gathering dust. It is breathing again. And the silence that protected a killer for decades is finally starting to crack. Night settles over Berlin like a held breath, the kind that presses against the windows and makes even familiar streets feel staged, and inside the interrogation room the air thickens as the man leans back, eyes fixed on a spot just above the investigator's head. as if the truth might be written there, faint but legible if he stares long enough. He asks for water. He asks how much they really know. These are not questions of innocence. They are questions of negotiation, the prelude to a story that has been rehearsed in silence for decades. He begins with the city, because Berlin is always the excuse, always the backdrop people hide behind when they explain the unexplainable. He talks about pressure, about fear, about how everyone in those days had secrets and how some secrets felt heavier than others. He describes Karen as intelligent, cautious, someone who knew how to listen. He admits he visited her apartment that night, frames it as casual, unplanned, a conversation that stretched too long. The investigator lets him talk, because lies reveal themselves best when they're allowed to breathe. The first version is gentle. An argument, yes, but nothing violent. Raised voices. Hurt pride. He claims he left while she was still alive, still standing, still whole. The investigator doesn't interrupt. He simply slides a photograph across the table, a crime scene image carefully chosen, not the most graphic, but specific enough to anchor the discussion in reality. The man's eyes flicker. His mouth tightens. The room grows quieter, as if the walls themselves are listening. He adjusts his story. Now he admits to losing his temper, to pushing her, to an accident. He insists it was never meant to go that far, that the sound she made when she fell still visits him at night. He says panic took over. He says he didn't call for help because in Berlin in 1982, calling the police felt like inviting your life to collapse in on itself. The investigator notes the phrasing: accident, panic, collapse. Words chosen to soften the shape of guilt. But the evidence resists softening. The blunt force trauma doesn't align with a simple fall. The timeline doesn't bend easily around his explanations. The investigator presses, gently but relentlessly, returning to the same points from different angles, watching for cracks. The man grows tired. Decades of holding a story together have taken their toll. His shoulders sag. His voice drops. He stops trying to sound convincing and starts trying to sound understood. What emerges is not a clean confession, but something messier, more unsettling. He admits to striking her with an object he refuses to name. He admits to staying longer than he claimed, to cleaning up in a daze, to locking the door behind him with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. He insists he never meant to kill her, as if intention could rewrite outcome. The investigator listens, records everything, aware that truth in cold cases often arrives fragmented, distorted by time and self-preservation. Outside the room, the legal machinery grinds into motion. Prosecutors are briefed. Old statutes are reviewed. The question isn't just what happened, but what can be proven now, so many years later. Evidence degrades. Memories warp. Defense attorneys circle, already constructing arguments around contamination, around procedural gaps, around the impossibility of certainty after 4 decades. The past may be catching up, but it is still constrained by the present. News coverage intensifies. The story grows legs, spreads beyond Berlin, picked up by international outlets hungry for narratives where time itself is the antagonist. Commentators debate whether justice delayed can still be justice. Karen's name trends briefly, surrounded by speculation, by armchair analysis, by people who were children when she died and now feel strangely implicated by history. Her family, long silent, is asked for statements. They give none. Some wounds do not need microphones. The investigator visits Karen's old neighborhood again, walking the streets with new eyes. Cafes have changed names. Buildings have changed colors. But the geometry remains, the angles and distances that shaped that night. He stands outside her building, imagines the door opening, the footsteps on the stairs, the moment when conversation tipped into violence. Cold cases demand this kind of empathy, not to excuse, but to understand the sequence of choices that led to the irreversible. In the archives, more pieces surface. A forgotten note from an early interview hints at Karen's fear in the weeks before her death, a sense of being watched, of conversations that felt heavier than they should have. At the time, it was dismissed as anxiety, as the ambient stress of living in a divided city. Now, it reads differently. The investigator feels the familiar mix of anger and regret. How many signals were missed because no one knew what to listen for. The man's background is dissected. Employment records reveal access to tools that could explain the injury. Personal letters hint at possessiveness, at resentment masked as concern. None of it is definitive alone. Together, they form a pattern that feels increasingly difficult to ignore. The prosecution builds its case carefully, aware that overreach could undo everything. Cold cases are fragile. They break easily if handled with too much force. In another interrogation session, the man grows defensive. He accuses the investigator of rewriting history, of imposing modern morality on a different time. He says things were complicated then, that people made choices they wouldn't make now. The investigator responds quietly that Karen doesn't get the benefit of changing times. She is frozen at 32, forever. The words land harder than any accusation. The man falls silent. For a long moment, there is nothing but the hum of electricity and the distant noise of the city. When he speaks again, his voice is different, stripped of performance. He talks about fear, not of prison, but of being seen for who he was in that moment. He admits he thought the case would never resurface, that Berlin had too many ghosts to keep track of them all. He says he built a life on the assumption that silence was permanent. The investigator doesn't argue. He knows better. Silence is never permanent. It just waits for the right pressure. As the case moves toward court, tension ripples through the city. Supporters of the victim demand accountability. Skeptics warn against convictions built on decades-old evidence. Legal experts fill airtime with cautious language, reminding audiences that certainty is rare in cases like this. The phrase cold case is repeated so often it begins to lose meaning, even as the reality behind it sharpens. For the investigator, the nights grow longer. He reviews transcripts, listens to recordings, searches for consistency, for moments where truth peeks through despite the speaker's efforts to control it. He feels the weight of responsibility acutely. This is not just about closing a file. It is about honoring a life interrupted and ensuring that the story told in court aligns as closely as possible with what actually happened in that small apartment on a winter night. The defense files motions. Evidence is challenged. The DNA match is scrutinized, its limitations highlighted. The courier testimony is attacked as unreliable. Memory is painted as an enemy of truth. Each argument is expected, each one a reminder that the past does not surrender easily. The prosecution counters with context, with accumulation, with the quiet strength of details that reinforce each other. Public interest peaks again when a date is set. The courtroom fills with reporters, with observers drawn by the gravity of history unfolding in real time. The man sits at the defense table, expression neutral, hands folded, as if posture alone could communicate innocence. The investigator takes the stand, voice steady, recounting the reopening of the case, the evidence, the process. He avoids dramatics. Cold cases don't need embellishment. The facts are heavy enough. Karen's absence is palpable. Her photograph rests on a table, a reminder of what this is really about. The prosecutor speaks her name carefully, deliberately, refusing to let it become abstract. The defense speaks of doubt, of time, of the dangers of certainty. The jury listens, tasked with bridging a gap of 40 years using fragments and faith. As proceedings continue, something unexpected happens. The man requests to speak again. Privately at first, then formally. He offers additional details, small but significant, about the object used, about where it was discarded, about the moments after he left the apartment. Investigators follow up. A search is conducted in a place long overlooked. And there, improbably, impossibly, something surfaces. Corroded, damaged, but recognizable. The discovery sends a shock through the case. Long-lost evidence, literal this time, not just metaphorical. The kind that changes the tone of a courtroom, the posture of a defense, the calculations of a jury. The past has reached forward, offering one more piece, as if to say it was never as gone as everyone thought. Berlin watches again, caught between disbelief and grim satisfaction. Cold cases are supposed to stay cold. They're supposed to remind us of limits. But sometimes, against expectation, they unravel, thread by thread, revealing not just what happened, but how close it always was to being known. And as the trial edges toward its conclusion, the city feels the old chill return, mixed now with something sharper, something that feels like reckoning. The object is lifted from the soil with care that borders on reverence, gloves tight, breath held, because everyone present understands what this moment means, not just for the case, but for the years that tried and failed to bury it. Rust flakes away under the light, metal scarred by time and moisture, edges softened but unmistakable in shape, heavy enough to explain the force, ordinary enough to have vanished into the background of a changing city. It is bagged, sealed, catalogued, and in that simple sequence of motions, for decades of uncertainty compress into something tangible, something that can be weighed, photographed, argued over in court. Long-lost evidence is no longer a phrase. It is a thing. The courtroom absorbs the news like a shockwave. The defense requests a recess, voices low but urgent, recalculating strategies that were built on absence, on the idea that time had erased too much to ever be certain. The prosecution remains outwardly calm, but inside, the case shifts shape, gaining gravity, density. Jurors exchange glances they quickly look away from, aware that they are witnessing history flex, that the past is not as fixed as they were led to believe. For the investigator, the discovery feels less like triumph and more like relief edged with sorrow. Relief that the truth has not fully escaped. Sorrow that it took so long for the ground to give it back. He remembers the first day he opened the file, the smell of old paper, the sense of speaking into a void. Now the void answers, not with words, but with iron and rust and the quiet insistence of fact. The man watches the proceedings with a stillness that borders on brittle. When the object is mentioned, his eyes close briefly, not in denial, but in recognition. This is the detail he avoided, the one he circled around in interviews, the weight he carried without ever naming. When questioned again, he does not resist. He corrects small inaccuracies. He points out where memory had blurred. His voice is flat, drained of theater. Confession, when it finally comes, is not dramatic. It is administrative, a series of acknowledgments that align too neatly with the evidence to be coincidence. He speaks of the night in fragments, moments unspooling without order. The cold on the stairs. The smell of Karen's apartment. Ink and soap. The argument, sharper than he admitted before, fueled by fear that had been building for weeks. He speaks of jealousy, of control disguised as concern, of a moment when the object was in his hand before he consciously decided to use it. He does not try to justify the strike. He only explains how quickly everything after it unraveled. The courtroom listens, suspended between the intimacy of his recollection and the formality of law. This is not closure. Closure is a myth people invent to survive unanswered questions. This is alignment, the slow snapping into place of pieces that never should have been scattered this long. Karen's name is spoken again, not as a headline, but as a person whose last moments are finally being described with clarity rather than speculation. Outside, Berlin reacts in layers. Older residents remember the fear, the rumors, the sense that something unfinished lingered in the air. Younger ones experience the case as revelation, proof that history is not settled, that even the stories they think they know can change shape. The media oscillates between restraint and frenzy, careful with language, but hungry for meaning. Evidence found after 40 years. Cold case no longer cold. Each headline tries to contain what is, at its core, uncontainable. Legal arguments resume with renewed intensity. The defense shifts focus, now emphasizing remorse, the passage of time, the man's life since the crime. They speak of rehabilitation without ever using the word forgiveness. The prosecution responds by returning again and again to the same point. Time does not reduce responsibility. It only tests it. The law listens impassive, designed to absorb human complexity without reflecting it back. As testimony continues, Other voices enter the record. A former colleague recalls Karen's unease, the way she flinched at unexpected phone calls. A friend speaks of advice given and ignored, of warnings that felt melodramatic at the time. Each statement adds texture, depth, not to the crime itself, but to the life it interrupted. The court becomes a space where Karen exists again, not just as a victim, but as a presence shaped by relationships and choices. The investigator is called once more, this time to contextualize the evidence found, to explain why it was missed, why it mattered. He speaks carefully, aware that he represents not just his own work, but the limitations of an era. He explains the gaps, the technological boundaries, the assumptions that guided early investigations. He does not make excuses. He makes distinctions. There is a difference. When he steps down, he feels the familiar fatigue that comes with proximity to truth. Solving a cold case does not feel like victory. It feels like ending a long vigil, like finally allowing yourself to sit after standing guard for years you didn't realize you were counting. He thinks of Karen's family, of what this moment means and does not mean. Answers do not resurrect. They only clarify. The verdict does not arrive quickly. Deliberation stretches on, each hour amplifying speculation, anxiety, hope. Commentators fill the silence with analysis, parsing jury body language, predicting outcomes with the confidence of those who are not responsible for deciding. Inside the jury room, time behaves differently. The past and present overlap, evidence and emotion jostle for space, and the weight of consequence presses down on every discussion. When the jury returns, the room stands. The words are spoken clearly, deliberately, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Guilty. Not as a symbol, not as a headline, but as a legal conclusion reached after 40 years of waiting. The man absorbs it without visible reaction. Perhaps he knew this was always where the story ended. Perhaps he simply ran out of ways to imagine it ending differently. Sentencing follows, measured, restrained. The judge acknowledges the years between crime and consequence, not as mitigation, but as context. He speaks of accountability, of the persistence of truth, of a harm that extends beyond a single night. The sentence is handed down. It is not enough for some. It is too much for others. It is ultimately what the system allows. As the courtroom empties, the air feels thinner, lighter, and heavier at once. Karen's photograph is removed, returned to a folder, a face that no longer needs to argue for recognition. Outside, cameras capture reactions, statements are issued, silence is interpreted as meaning. The city exhales, unsure whether this is relief or simply the end of suspense. In the days that follow, the case becomes a reference point, cited in discussions about justice, about technology, about the moral obligations of persistence. Cold cases are re-examined, files reopened, hope recalibrated. But for those closest to this one, the aftermath is quieter, more private. Grief does not resolve on a schedule. Neither does understanding. The investigator visits the river where the object was found, now cordoned off, disturbed earth slowly settling back into place. He thinks about the thin line between loss and recovery, about how close the truth was all along, hidden not by distance, but by assumption. Berlin hums around him, alive, indifferent, carrying forward as it always does. Cold cases unravel in unexpected ways. Not with thunder, but with persistence. Not with certainty, but with courage to look again. This one has given up its secret, but the echo remains, a reminder that time can delay reckoning, but it cannot cancel it. And somewhere in the fabric of the city, a silence has finally been broken, replaced not by peace, but by something more honest, something that will linger long after the headlines fade. After the verdict, Berlin does what it always does with endings that don't feel like endings at all. It absorbs them slowly, unevenly, letting the meaning seep into cracks no one knew were still open. The courthouse empties, reporters drift away in clusters, and the man is let out through a side door. No shouts, no spectacle, just the dull finality of steel doors closing where possibilities once lived. Justice is spoken, but it has spoken late, and lateness has a sound of its own. a hollow echo that follows everyone involved long after the microphones are packed away. For Karen's family, the days blur together. Interviews are declined. Statements are rewritten and never sent. There is relief, yes, but it arrives tangled with anger, with exhaustion, with the knowledge that nothing returned can ever compensate for what was taken. Closure, that word everyone reaches for, refuses to settle. Instead, there is a quieter sensation, like pressure easing from a room that's been sealed too long, leaving behind air that feels unfamiliar but breathable. They visit her grave, bring flowers that wilt too quickly in the cold, speak to her in murmurs that don't ask questions anymore. The investigator returns to his desk, to the strange anticlimax that follows resolution. Files are closed, stamped, archived, their edges still warm from use. The Karen Vogel case now has an ending, a conclusion that can be summarized in databases and training seminars, cited as proof that persistence matters. But the investigator knows better. He knows the story doesn't compress easily. It resists neat framing. It leaves residue. He rereads the earliest reports, not out of necessity, but compulsion. The handwriting of officers long retired, some long dead. The tentative language. The missed connections. He wonders how the case might have unfolded if one question had been asked differently, if one assumption had been challenged sooner. These thoughts are dangerous, circular, but unavoidable. Cold cases force you to confront not just what happened, but what didn't. In the media, the narrative shifts. The focus moves from mystery to meaning. Commentators talk about technology bridging decades, about DNA as a time machine, about justice finally catching up. They rarely mention the cost of waiting, the way unresolved violence shapes communities in subtle, corrosive ways. In Charlottenburg, older residents find themselves revisiting memories they thought had faded, the unease of living near an unanswered question, the way doors were locked more carefully, the way trust thinned without anyone naming why. New information surfaces in the wake of the trial, details that didn't make it into court but matter all the same. Letters Karen never sent, drafts saved and forgotten, revealing a growing sense of being watched, of boundaries tested. Friends read them now with a sharp intake of breath, recognizing warning signs they didn't have language for at the time. The past rearranges itself, each revelation nudging the picture closer to coherence, even as it deepens the ache. The man, now a convicted killer, begins his sentence far from Berlin, removed from the city that held his secret for so long. In interviews with prison psychologists, he speaks less about guilt and more about time, about how years slipped by under the assumption that consequences had been outrun. He admits that the cold case haunted him not as fear, but as background noise, a low hum he learned to live with. Silence, he says, is easier than people think. It just asks for patience. Law enforcement agencies across Germany take note. Cold case units receive renewed attention, modest funding increases, quiet encouragement to reopen files once deemed impossible. Karen's case is cited in internal memos, not as a miracle, but as a model of methodical re-examination. The lesson is not that every case can be solved, but that none should be assumed unsolvable. The distinction matters. The investigator is invited to speak at a conference, asked to recount the breakthrough, the evidence, the moment everything changed. He complies, but his emphasis surprises the audience. He talks less about DNA and more about humility, about the danger of certainty, about the way time can distort confidence as much as it erodes memory. Cold cases, he says, don't reward brilliance. They reward stubbornness. At night, he dreams of files reopening themselves, of voices speaking from margins, of rooms frozen in the moment before something goes wrong. He wakes with the familiar weight in his chest, the understanding that solving one case does not quiet the others. Somewhere, there are more names, more unanswered questions, more apartments where time stopped without anyone noticing. Karen's case does not grant immunity from that knowledge. It sharpens it. Berlin continues to evolve. New buildings rise where old addresses once stood. Streets are renamed. Generations shift. To many, the 1982 murder becomes a story they half remember from a documentary, a cautionary tale about patience and progress. But beneath that abstraction, the reality remains stubbornly human. A woman lost, a truth delayed, a reckoning that arrived only after it could no longer change the most important outcome. On the anniversary of her death, a small article appears in a local paper. No headline designed to shock. Just a quiet acknowledgement. Karen Vogel, remembered. The cold case that is no longer cold. Readers skim past it on their way to other news, but if you stop, reread, feel the weight of years compressed into a paragraph. Memory is selective, but it is not entirely merciful. The investigator walks past Karen's old building one last time. Someone new lives there now. Lights on. Music playing faintly through the walls. Life has reclaimed the space without apology. He doesn't linger. He knows better than to expect the past to announce itself. It never does. It waits to be recognized. Cold cases change the people who touch them. They teach patience, yes, but also restraint, the understanding that answers can wound as much as they heal. Karen's case did not restore balance. It simply corrected a long-standing wrong, shifting the weight of history by a small but meaningful degree. That is more than most cases ever manage. As Berlin settles into another night, the story fades from active conversation, slipping into the archive of things that happened, things that mattered, things that remind the city who it has been. The silence that follows is different now, less oppressive, but still present, a reminder that even when truth emerges, it does not erase what came before it. The cold case is solved, the mystery answered. And yet, in the quiet spaces between sirens and headlines, the echo remains a low, persistent hum, carrying the lesson that time does not absolve, that evidence can sleep but not die, and that some stories, once awakened, continue to speak long after the final verdict has been read. In the months after the sentence is handed down, the case refuses to settle into history the way everyone expects it to, because resolution has a strange side effect. It loosens other things. Doors open. Tongues unstick. Files that once felt inert begin to feel unstable, as if Karen's case has shifted the equilibrium of silence across the city. Detectives notice it first. A phone rings with a tip about a different case. An old letter is mailed anonymously to a precinct. A retired officer calls to correct a detail he's carried uneasily for years. The solved cold case becomes a signal flare, not a conclusion. The investigator feels it too, a subtle but persistent pull back toward the past. He tells himself the work is done, that the file is closed, that justice, imperfect, delayed, but real, has been served. Yet his thoughts return again and again to the early days of the investigation, to the assumptions that shaped it, to the people who were dismissed because they didn't fit a theory that felt convenient at the time. Cold cases leave behind a kind of residue, a question that lingers long after the answer arrives. What else did we miss? In a storage facility on the outskirts of the city, shelves of boxed evidence sit under fluorescent lights, labeled in careful handwriting, each one a capsule of unfinished stories. An audit is ordered, routine on paper, quietly ambitious in practice. Items are re-examined. Logs are compared. Procedures are questioned. The Karen Vogel case becomes a reference point, a reminder that absence of proof is not proof of absence, that evidence overlooked is not evidence resolved. The media circles back, framing the story differently now. Less shock, more introspection. Articles ask what it means for a society when justice arrives decades late, whether punishment still holds meaning when the life lived in between appears, on the surface, ordinary. There are profiles of cold case investigators, human interest pieces that romanticize persistence without fully capturing its cost. There are debates about memory, about fairness, about whether reopening old wounds serves the living or only disturbs the dead. No one agrees. That disagreement becomes part of the legacy. Karen's name appears in places it never did before. Academic papers, panel discussions, training manuals. She becomes an example, a lesson, a symbol, and that transformation is not entirely comfortable for those who knew her as something simpler and more profound, a person. Her friends speak privately about the strangeness of seeing her reduced to a case study, her death abstracted into bullet points and procedural insights. They understand the value, but they grieve the loss of intimacy all over again. The investigator meets one of them for coffee, a woman who shared long lunches with Karen, who remembers her laugh more vividly than her fear. They talk about small things at first, weather, work, the way Berlin seems louder than it used to be. Eventually, the conversation drifts, inevitably, back to 1982. The friend thanks him, then surprises him by apologizing for not pushing harder, for not insisting something was wrong when Karen mentioned feeling uneasy. The investigator tells her gently that hindsight is cruel, that clarity always comes too late. They sit with that for a moment, letting it be true. In prison, the man begins to write. Not letters to the press, not confessions meant to shift blame, but fragmented notes addressed to no one in particular. He writes about Berlin in winter, about the way the city felt like a maze with no center. He writes about Karen, not sentimentally, but with a precision that suggests memory sharpened by years of suppression. Psychologists read the pages carefully, noting how language changes when denial is no longer useful. Remorse, when it arrives, does not look the way people expect. It looks like fixation, like repetition, like an inability to escape the moment everything diverged. None of this is public, but fragments leak, as they always do, feeding a quieter conversation about guilt and accountability. Is regret meaningful if it arrives after consequence? Does understanding motive cheapen the harm? These questions do not resolve. They circulate, gaining heat in academic and legal circles, while the wider public moves on, attention pulled toward newer outrages, fresher mysteries. The investigator, meanwhile, finds himself assigned to another old file, then another. Not because of his success, but because cold cases have a way of finding those who don't look away from them. Each one is different, but the patterns echo. Early momentum, fading leads, a quiet surrender to time. He approaches them differently now, less confident, more patient, acutely aware of how easily certainty can masquerade as progress. Karen's case has recalibrated his instincts. One afternoon, while reviewing a case from the late 70s, he notices a detail that feels uncomfortably familiar, an evidence item logged but never tested, deemed insignificant by the standards of its day. He pauses, hand hovering over the file, feeling the weight of recognition. This is how it starts. Not with revelation, but with hesitation, with the decision to look again instead of turning the page. He makes a note, sends a request. The system stirs. Berlin doesn't notice these small movements, these quiet shifts beneath its surface. The city is busy reinventing itself, as it always has, layering new identities over old foundations. Tourists walk streets that once held secrets, unaware of the histories beneath their feet. But history does not require witnesses to persist. It waits in records, in soil, in memory, ready to assert itself when conditions allow. On the anniversary of the verdict, a small gathering takes place, informal, unannounced. A few colleagues. A candle. No speeches. The investigator stands with them, feeling the odd mix of solidarity and solitude that defines this kind of work. Solving a cold case does not bring celebration. It brings alignment, a brief moment when effort and outcome touch before drifting apart again. He thinks of Karen, of the way her name changed shape over time, from person to case to lesson. He hopes, quietly, that something essential has been preserved. The legal system continues its slow digestion of the case. Appeals are filed, reviewed, largely dismissed. The reasoning is thorough, unemotional. The past is acknowledged, without indulgence. Finality inches closer, not as a dramatic endpoint, but as a procedural certainty. Each ruling tightens the frame, narrowing the space for ambiguity, even as moral questions remain stubbornly wide. In classrooms, students discuss the case, arguing over investigative choices, over the ethics of delayed prosecution. Some see it as a triumph of science. Others see it as a warning about over-reliance on technology, about the risk of letting algorithms substitute for judgment. The truth, as always, sits somewhere in between, resistant to tidy conclusions. The investigator listens to these debates from a distance, aware that his own understanding is shaped less by theory than by accumulation, by hours spent with people whose lives were altered by a single night. He knows that cold cases are not puzzles waiting for clever solutions. They are negotiations with time, with memory, with institutional humility. Karen's case did not prove that justice always wins. It proved that it sometimes arrives, limping late, but still capable of mattering. As another winter approaches, Berlin settles into familiar rhythms. Lights come on early. Breath fogs in the cold. Somewhere, a file is opened, a sample tested, a question asked again for the first time in decades. The ripple continues, subtle but real, tracing back to a woman found in her apartment in 1982, to a case that refused to stay buried. Cold cases do not end. They transform. They leave behind altered landscapes, recalibrated expectations, a heightened sensitivity to silence. Karen Vogel's story now lives in that altered space, no longer a void, not quite a resolution, but a reminder etched into the city's collective memory. Time can delay truth, but it cannot erase the need for it. Time passes differently after a cold case is solved, stretching in some places, compressing in others, and for those closest to Karen's story, the calendar no longer feels like a neutral measure. Anniversaries gain weight. Ordinary dates develop sharp edges. The city may have moved on, but beneath the surface, the case continues to circulate, resurfacing in conversations that begin about something else entirely. A new story about a reopened file. A documentary trailer. A question asked too casually at a dinner table. Berlin remembers in fragments. The investigator notices it in himself first. A heightened sensitivity to patterns. A reluctance to accept easy explanations. When a witness hesitates, he waits longer than he used to. When an answer comes too quickly, he slows the conversation down. Karen's case taught him that truth rarely arrives fully formed. It leaks. It seeps. It accumulates in corners people stop checking. This awareness becomes both a tool and a burden, sharpening his work while quietly eroding his rest. In one of the reopened files, a woman's disappearance from the mid-80s, he encounters the same resistance he once felt with Karen's case. Old colleagues warn him not to chase ghosts. Families beg him not to raise hopes that will only collapse again. Administrators remind him of limited resources, of priorities dictated by the present. He listens, nods, and continues anyway, not out of defiance, but out of recognition. Cold cases don't announce themselves as solvable. They ask to be believed in despite uncertainty. Karen's family navigates a different aftermath. With the legal process largely complete, they are left alone with what remains, a mixture of relief and emptiness that defies articulation. Some relationships deepen under the shared weight of memory. Others fracture, strained by years of unresolved grief finally shifting into something else. They discover that answers, while necessary, do not restore equilibrium. They simply change the questions. One of Karen's sisters begins sorting through old boxes, letters kept for decades without being opened, objects saved because throwing them away felt like a second loss. She finds a notebook, its pages filled with half-formed thoughts, lists, observations that once seemed mundane. Now, read through the lens of what is known, they feel charged. Mentions of unease, of a presence that lingered too long, of conversations that left Karen unsettled without knowing why. The notebook is not evidence. It doesn't need to be. It is testimony to a state of mind that finally makes sense. Excerpts surface quietly, shared among family, then with investigators, then, cautiously, with researchers studying patterns of pre-incident behavior. Karen's words are treated with care, contextualized rather than sensationalized. This restraint matters. For once, her voice is not reduced to a footnote beneath the mechanics of her death. It exists on its own terms, fragile but intact. The man in prison follows the coverage sporadically, never asking for it, never entirely avoiding it either. He learns that silence no longer protects him from interpretation. Others tell his story now, frame his actions within larger conversations about violence, entitlement, fear. He becomes less a person than a reference, a case, a cautionary example. He writes less as time goes on, words failing him where routine takes over. Consequence settles in not as punishment, but as permanence. Across Germany, cold case units continue their quiet work, inspired but not transformed by Karen's case. Success remains rare. Most files resist resolution, their evidence too degraded, their witnesses gone. Still, something has shifted. Investigators ask different questions. They hesitate before closing doors. They document uncertainty more carefully, aware that future eyes may read their notes with different tools, different assumptions. Karen's legacy is procedural, almost invisible, but real. The investigator attends another conference, this time smaller, more intimate, a room full of people who understand the loneliness of unresolved work. They talk about fatigue, about the emotional cost of living with unanswered questions. Someone mentions Karen's case not as a triumph, but as a reminder of responsibility. He appreciates that distinction. Cold cases are not trophies. They are obligations deferred. Later, walking alone through the city, he notices a plaque he's passed 100 times without seeing. A marker commemorating an event long forgotten by most, a reminder that Berlin is layered with stories waiting for attention. He wonders how many crimes have dissolved into the urban fabric, their victims remembered only by those who loved them. The thought is not paralyzing. It is clarifying. Public interest in Karen's case wanes, as it always does. New stories replace old ones. Algorithms recalibrate. The phrase Berlin 1982 cold case becomes searchable history rather than active news. Yet in certain circles, the case continues to resonate, cited in debates about statute limitations, about evidence preservation, about the ethics of delayed accountability. Karen's name appears in footnotes, in lectures, in policy drafts. It is a strange kind of afterlife. The investigator receives a letter from a student, someone who read about the case and decided to pursue forensic science. The letter is earnest, hopeful, filled with belief in progress. He reads it twice, struck by the optimism, by the faith that systems can improve, that mistakes can be corrected. He writes back carefully, encouraging without promising too much, aware that the work demands resilience more than idealism. As years continue to stack quietly, the case settles into something stable, no longer volatile, no longer actively reshaping itself. The sharpest edges dull. What remains is not peace, but integration, the gradual folding of a once-open wound into the larger story of a city that has endured worse and learned to carry it. Berlin at night hums with its familiar contradictions, history and reinvention sharing the same streets. Somewhere, someone locks a door, unaware of the long chain of events that once unfolded in a similar building, decades ago. Somewhere else, an investigator opens a file, drawn by a detail that doesn't quite sit right. The cycle continues, not out of obsession, but out of duty. Cold cases do not demand belief. They demand attention. Karen Vogel's story, once buried under years of assumption and neglect, now occupies a different space, not solved in the way people imagine, but acknowledged in the way that matters. It stands as proof that silence can be challenged, that time can be questioned, and that even in a city built on layers of forgotten history, some truths refuse to stay lost. The echo persists, not loud, not insistent, but steady, a reminder woven into Berlin's rhythm. Justice may arrive late, but memory, once awakened, does not go back to sleep. The case begins to live a quieter life, the kind that unfolds away from headlines and courtrooms, settling into routines where its influence is felt more than named. In police stations, it shows up as a pause before a file is shelved, a second look at an evidence tag once dismissed as trivial. In classrooms, it appears as a hypothetical posed without drama, a reminder that time is not an argument, only a condition. Karen's story has slipped into the bloodstream of procedure, invisible but active. The investigator senses the change most clearly during interviews. People speak differently now, less certain that silence will protect them indefinitely. An aging witness in another case hesitates, then offers a detail he once thought unimportant. After what happened with that Berlin case, he says, not even naming Karen, trusting the reference to carry weight on its own. The investigator listens, recognizing the subtle power of precedent. One solved cold case does not rewrite history, but it alters expectations. Karen's notebook becomes part of a research archive, handled with gloves, its pages digitized, its handwriting preserved pixel by pixel. Scholars debate how much weight to give pre-incident writings, how to distinguish intuition from hindsight. The discussion is careful, almost reverent. Her words are no longer evidence of a crime, but evidence of awareness, of the way danger often announces itself quietly before it arrives. In this form, her voice continues to speak, not accusing, not pleading, simply existing. The family visits the archive once, escorted through controlled corridors, shown how Karen's pages are stored, how her name is indexed. It is both comforting and unsettling to see her reduced to metadata, to know that strangers will study her handwriting, her phrasing, her doubts. They accept it because they understand the alternative. Forgetting is worse. In prison, the man settles into routine, the kind designed to flatten time into manageable segments. Days marked by meals, counts, exercise. He is no longer the subject of urgent interest. Appeals have failed. The narrative has solidified around him in ways he cannot influence. He listens to the radio sometimes, catching fragments of news about cases like his, reopened, re-examined. He wonders, privately, how many others are waiting for the past to knock on their door. The thought does not bring comfort. The investigator receives notice that the other file he flagged is moving forward, not toward resolution yet, but toward recognition. A sample will be tested. A witness recontacted. It is a small victory, procedural rather than emotional, but it feels significant. Karen's case has not just closed a chapter, it has opened a method. He is careful not to romanticize it. Most of these efforts will end in confirmation of loss, not reversal. Still, effort itself becomes a form of respect. Berlin's cultural memory absorbs the case in its own way. A theater company stages a minimalist production about time and guilt, inspired loosely by unsolved crimes of the 80s. The program notes mention Karen's case without dramatizing it. Audiences leave thoughtful, unsettled, carrying questions rather than conclusions. Art, like investigation, resists neat endings. The investigator attends one performance anonymously, sitting in the back, watching actors move through abstracted versions of moments he knows too well. He feels an unexpected release, not because the play explains anything, but because it acknowledges uncertainty without trying to conquer it. Cold cases live in that space, between what is known and what must be lived with. Years continue to pass. New technology emerges, promising sharper analysis, deeper insight. With each advancement comes a familiar tension, hope balanced against restraint. Karen's case is cited again in debates about ethical boundaries, about how far the past should be pulled into the present. There are no easy answers. There never were. The investigator's hair grays. His workload shifts. Younger colleagues ask him for advice, for stories that will help them understand the patience this work requires. He tells them about Berlin in winter, about the weight of a file reopened without fanfare, about the danger of certainty. He does not tell them everything. Some lessons cannot be transferred. They have to be learned slowly, in rooms where time seems to stop. Karen's name appears one more time in public discourse when a law is amended, extending resources for long-term investigations. She is mentioned alongside others, part of a list that argues for change. It is not a monument, but it is something. Her life intersects policy, procedure, memory, leaving marks that ripple outward beyond anything she could have imagined. On a quiet evening, the investigator walks along the river where the object was found, now indistinguishable from any other stretch of water. The current moves steadily, indifferent to the stories it carries past. He thinks about how evidence can hide in plain sight, about how landscapes absorb secrets without judgment. He also thinks about the moment it surfaced, about the way the past briefly asserted itself before receding again. Cold cases, he realizes, are not about resurrection. They are about acknowledgement, about refusing to let time alone decide what matters. Karen's case did not restore balance. It corrected a silence, replacing it with something imperfect but real. That has to be enough. As Berlin prepares for another winter, lights reflecting off wet pavement, the city hums with continuity. Lives unfold without reference to old headlines. Somewhere, a student studies forensic techniques inspired by a story they half remember. Somewhere else, an investigator hesitates before closing a file, hearing an echo they can't quite name. The case no longer demands attention, but it has earned it permanently. It exists now as part of the city's long conversation with itself, a reminder embedded not in stone, but in practice, that time complicates truth, but does not nullify it, that silence can be challenged, and that some stories, once brought back into the light, continue to shape the shadows long after the spotlight has moved on. The years don't announce themselves when they pass. They accumulate quietly, like dust on files no one opens anymore, and yet the Karen Vogel case continues to exert a low, persistent gravity on the people who once orbited it. Not urgency, not obsession, something subtler. A recalibration of instinct. In precincts across the city, when a detective hesitates before dismissing a lead, when an archivist flags a mislabeled box instead of shelving it, the influence is there, unnamed but unmistakable. The investigator feels that during a routine review, the kind designed to ensure nothing critical has slipped through bureaucratic seams. He reads summaries of closed cases, sees language he once wrote himself echoed back through younger hands. Insufficient evidence. No further action recommended. Phrases that feel responsible, reasonable, and yet now carry a faint discomfort. Karen's case has taught him that these conclusions are less definitive than they appear. They are pauses, not endings. A journalist reaches out, years late, asking for perspective on cold cases in the age of advanced forensics. The investigator declines a formal interview, but agrees to an off-the-record conversation. He speaks carefully, wary of narratives that frame technology as salvation. DNA didn't solve Karen's case, he says. People did. People who chose to look again, to question assumptions, to tolerate uncertainty longer than comfort allowed. The journalist listens, scribbles notes, later publishes an article that resists easy optimism. It doesn't trend. That feels appropriate. Elsewhere, Karen's story enters the quiet curriculum of police training, not as a spectacle, but as a caution. Recruits study the early missteps, the blind spots shaped by context, by bias, by the limits of the era. Instructors emphasize documentation, preservation, humility. The lesson is not that mistakes are unforgivable, but that they are inevitable and therefore must be anticipated. Karen's case becomes a mirror, reflecting how systems learn, slowly, from their own shadows. The family marks another anniversary privately. No statements. No public gestures. Just a shared meal, familiar recipes, conversation that drifts and returns. They speak of Karen in the present tense sometimes, catching themselves, not correcting it. Memory blurs grammar. They have learned to live with that. The case no longer defines her for them, though it will always frame how others remember her. That division feels both protective and isolating. In prison, the man grows older, his name fading from relevance as new cases claim attention. He participates in mandated programs, says what is expected of him, avoids what is not. Occasionally, he is asked about Berlin, about the 80s, about how it felt to live with something unresolved for so long. He answers sparsely. There is nothing left to manage now, no secret to maintain. Only time, stretched thin and repetitive, offering no illusions of escape. The investigator's workload shifts again, administrative responsibilities encroaching on fieldwork. He accepts it with ambivalence. Distance from active cases offers perspective, but also a sense of removal. He reads reports instead of walking scenes, reviews strategy instead of chasing leads. Yet, even here, Karen's influence persists. He challenges closures more often, asks for one more review, requests justification where once he might have accepted consensus. It slows things down. He doesn't apologize. Berlin continues its relentless renewal. Construction, cranes mark the skyline. Old buildings give way to glass and steel. With each change, another layer of the past is sealed beneath the present. The city has always done this, learned survival through reinvention. But beneath the fresh surfaces, history remains compacted, pressure waiting for release. Karen's case is one of many that proved this is not metaphor. It is process. A small symposium convenes on the ethics of delayed justice. Legal scholars, psychologists, investigators share space, debate without resolution. Karen's case is referenced again, not as proof, but as provocation. What does accountability mean when decades intervene? How does punishment intersect with time served unknowingly? No one leaves with answers. That, too, feels appropriate. The case resists simplification, even in its solved state. The investigator speaks briefly, unprepared remarks, words chosen as they arrive. He says that cold cases teach patience but also responsibility, that time does not absolve institutions of their duty to remember, that every file closed prematurely is a decision with consequences, even if those consequences remain invisible for years. He finishes quickly, sits down, lets the silence do the work. Later, alone, he revisits the moment the evidence surfaced, the improbable clarity of metal pulled from earth. He remembers the collective stillness, the way everyone sensed that something irreversible had just occurred. Not because a mystery was ending, but because the past had reasserted itself. That sensation stays with him, a reminder that truth has mass, that it displaces things when it moves. Karen's notebook is cited again in a study about early warning signs, anonymized but recognizable to those who know. Her words continue to travel, detached from the life that produced them, influencing protocols, shaping awareness. There is comfort in that and unease. Legacy is rarely what anyone intends. As another cohort of officers graduates, the investigator watches from a distance, seeing potential where he once saw certainty. He wonders which of them will one day inherit a box like Karen's, labeled, shelved, waiting. He hopes they will hesitate before closing it. Hopes they will remember that cold cases are not failures. Their questions deferred. The city hums into night, lights reflected in windows that conceal countless private lives. Somewhere, a person locks a door, unaware of how much history that simple action carries. Somewhere else, an archivist adjusts a shelf, unknowingly preserving the key to a future reckoning. The machinery of memory turns slowly, unevenly, but it turns. Karen Vogel's case no longer asks to be solved. It asks to be remembered correctly. Not as spectacle, not as miracle, but as evidence that time complicates truth without erasing it, that silence can be durable but not invincible, and that when the past finally speaks, it does so not to shock, but to be acknowledged. By the time the case reaches what the system calls its final stage, it no longer feels final to anyone who has lived inside it. Finality, like closure, is an administrative concept, useful for paperwork, inadequate for human experience. Appeals have been exhausted. Reviews completed. The legal language settles into permanence. And yet, the story continues to move, not forward, but outward, diffusing into places where law has no jurisdiction. The investigator senses this diffusion in the smallest moments. A pause before answering a question. A tightening in the chest when a date resurfaces. He has learned that solved cases do not end their influence. They simply change form. Karen's case no longer demands action, but it shapes perception, quietly recalibrating how he reads rooms, how he listens for what isn't being said. He no longer trusts silence to mean nothing. A request arrives from a historical archive preparing an exhibition on Berlin in the early 80s, a period often flattened into cliches of walls and watches and shadows. They ask for context, for guidance on how to reference unsolved crimes without exploiting them. He agrees to consult, insisting on restraint, on accuracy, on resisting the urge to dramatize what is already heavy enough. Karen's name is included once, carefully, among others, framed as part of a city struggling with fear it couldn't articulate at the time. It feels right. Visitors walk through the exhibition months later, moving past photographs and artifacts, absorbing history in curated fragments. Some pause longer than others. A few read Karen's name twice. Most move on. Memory works this way, uneven, selective. The exhibit does not aim to reopen wounds. It acknowledges that they existed. The investigator watches from a distance on opening day, anonymous, listening to conversations drift past him. He hears curiosity, surprise, occasional discomfort. No one asks him questions. That, too, feels appropriate. The case has moved beyond ownership. It belongs to the city now, folded into its narrative of division and endurance. In another part of Berlin, Karen's family downsizes, a practical decision that carries emotional weight. Objects are sorted, distributed, released. A few photographs are framed. Others are returned to boxes, not out of avoidance, but because memory needs boundaries. They talk about the trial less now, about the investigation hardly at all. Karen's presence returns to something closer to what it was before the murder became her defining context. A sister. A daughter. A woman with opinions about books and music and weather. This feels like progress, even if it arrives decades late. The man in prison reaches a milestone measured only by time served. It changes nothing materially, but it alters how he is seen by the system, by himself. He no longer marks days with anticipation. He endures them. Occasionally, he dreams of Berlin, but the city is distorted, streets looping back on themselves, doors opening onto rooms he doesn't recognize. He wakes without clarity, only the dull understanding that memory does not obey confinement. The investigator prepares to retire. Not immediately, not dramatically, just a form submitted, a timeline acknowledged. Colleagues react with polite surprise, then acceptance. He has stayed longer than many. Cold cases have a way of extending careers, anchoring people in unresolved purpose. Now, with Karen's case settled and others passed on, the timing feels right. In preparing to leave, he revisits old notes, deciding what to keep and what to let go. He pauses over Karen's file, thinner now than it once was, stripped of speculation, anchored by conclusion. He considers taking a copy of a page, a photograph, some token of the case that reshaped his thinking. He doesn't. He understands that the work was never about possession. It was about stewardship. On his last day, he clears his desk slowly. There are no speeches, just handshakes, nods, the unspoken acknowledgement of shared strain. As he leaves the building, he feels lighter than expected, not because the weight is gone, but because it has been redistributed, carried now by systems and people shaped in part by what he learned. Retirement brings its own quiet. Mornings without urgency. Time that stretches without structure. He walks more, reads, observes. And still, occasionally, a headline catches his eye, another cold case reopened somewhere else, another long-lost piece of evidence emerging from storage or soil. He feels the familiar tightening, not envy, not regret, but recognition. The work continues without him. That is how it should be. Berlin changes again. It always does. New generations inhabit the city without reference to its older fears, carrying different anxieties, different myths. The Karen Vogel case recedes further into the background, its details known mostly to those who study such things. Yet its influence persists in protocols, in caution, in the quiet insistence that some questions deserve more time than convenience allows. One evening, the retired investigator attends a lecture on memory and justice, sitting among strangers. The speaker mentions Karen's case briefly, accurately, without embellishment. No one turns to look at him. He feels an unexpected sense of relief. The story no longer needs him as a witness. It has stabilized. As he walks home, he passes the river again, dark now, reflective, unchanged in its indifference. He stops for a moment, watching the current move past the place where the object surfaced years earlier. Nothing marks the spot. Nothing needs to. The significance is not in the location, but in the act of looking, of refusing to assume that what is hidden will remain so. Cold cases, he realizes, are less about solving the past than about shaping the future. They remind institutions to stay humble, communities to stay attentive, individuals to stay willing to question certainty. Karen's case did all of that, quietly, without ceremony. As night settles over Berlin, the city resumes its familiar rhythm, carrying its history forward without pause. Somewhere, a file is being opened. Somewhere else, a memory is being re-examined. The machinery of justice turns slowly, imperfectly, but it turns. And in that movement, the echo of a winter night in 1982 remains, not as a scream, not as a headline, but as a steady, enduring reminder that time may stretch truth thin, but it cannot make it disappear. In the end, the story does not close with a sound, but with a quiet recalibration, the kind that happens so slowly it's almost mistaken for stillness. Berlin wakes each morning unaware that one of its longest-held silences has already been broken, that a question once left unanswered has settled into something heavier than mystery and lighter than peace. The city does not mark the moment. It rarely does. History here is absorbed, not announced. Somewhere in an archive, Karen Vogel's file rests among thousands of others, its spine unremarkable, its contents orderly at last. It no longer leaks uncertainty. It no longer asks to be solved. What it asks now is simpler and harder, to be remembered without distortion. Not as a symbol, not as a lesson alone, but as a life that intersected violence and time and truth in a way that reshaped more than one trajectory. The retired investigator returns to the file one final time, not physically but mentally, replaying the sequence that led from neglect to reckoning. He understands now that cold cases are not dormant. They are patient. They wait for the world to change enough to hear them. Technology helped. Persistence mattered more. But what truly unraveled the case was attention, the decision, repeated over years, to believe that silence was not an answer. He thinks about Karen not as a victim frozen in the moment of her death, but as a presence that moved through systems, altered habits, shifted conversations. Her story became part of training, part of policy, part of a broader cultural instinct to hesitate before assuming the past is finished with us. That is no small legacy, even if it was never asked for. Berlin carries on, its streets layered with new footsteps, new stories unfolding without awareness of what came before. Tourists photograph corners that once held fear. Residents argue about rent, about politics, about weather. Life insists on the present. Yet beneath that insistence, the city's memory hums, storing and releasing meaning in unpredictable ways. In a classroom, a student listens as an instructor mentions a cold case from 1982, solved decades later. The student writes the date down, circles it, feels a spark of curiosity that may one day turn into resolve. In a precinct, an officer double-checks an evidence label instead of trusting it blindly. In a family home, someone keeps a notebook rather than dismissing it as trivial. These are not dramatic acts. They are the aftershocks. Karen's family rarely speaks publicly now. They have reclaimed her from the machinery of attention, restoring her to something closer to memory than narrative. They tell stories that have nothing to do with the crime. Stories about stubbornness, about humor, about plans that never came to be. This, more than any verdict, feels like justice reclaiming ground. The man who killed her fades into institutional anonymity, his name reduced to a record, his relevance confined to the cautionary margins of law and psychology. He is no longer the axis around which the story turns. That distinction matters. Cold cases, when they unravel, must resist the gravity of the perpetrator. The center belongs to the truth delayed, not the guilt exposed. Berlin's relationship with its past remains complicated, as it always has been. The city knows walls and divisions, knows what it means to live with unresolved history. Karen's case joins that lineage, smaller in scale, but no less instructive. It reminds the city that forgetting is not the same as healing, and that time alone does not decide what is worth remembering. As years continue to pass, references to the case grow less frequent, but more precise. Errors drop away. Sensational language loses its appeal. What remains is accuracy, context, restraint. The story stabilizes. That is how cold cases finally rest, not when they are solved, but when they stop being misremembered. On a winter evening, much like the one decades earlier, Berlin's streets glisten under artificial light. Somewhere, a door closes. Somewhere else, a window stays lit a little longer than the rest. Life continues in small, unremarkable moments, unaware of how fragile continuity can be. Cold cases teach this above all else, that the past is not inert. It is responsive. It reacts to attention, to humility, to the willingness to admit that certainty is often premature. Karen Vogel's case unraveled not because it was extraordinary, but because it was treated, finally, as something unfinished. There is no music swell here. No final revelation waiting in the shadows. Just a city exhaling after holding its breath for 40 years, unsure whether the release is relief or fatigue, but knowing that something essential has shifted. The cold case is no longer cold. The evidence is no longer lost. The silence is no longer complete. And in that imperfect resolution, Berlin carries forward a truth it did not always want to hear, that time can bury answers, but it cannot bury responsibility, and that when the past is patient enough, it will eventually be heard, softly, insistently, and far too late to undo the harm. But just in time to remind us that forgetting was never the same as being free. Long after the last document is stamped and the last archive entry finalized, the case continues to exist in a space no system can catalog, a space made of memory, of instinct, of the quiet ways people change after learning how long the truth can hide. Berlin does not speak of it often anymore, but the city has learned something it cannot unlearn, and that knowledge moves beneath the surface like a slow current. On certain nights, when the streets empty earlier than usual and the air carries that familiar winter edge, the past feels closer than it should. It shows up not as images or facts, but as atmosphere. A hesitation before trusting a locked door. A glance held a second too long on a stranger's back. These are not fears. They are echoes, residues left behind by a silence that lasted for decades and then broke. The retired investigator feels it when he wakes before dawn, the room dark, the city still. He no longer thinks in case numbers or evidence chains, but in moments. The smell of old paper. The weight of a rusted object in an evidence bag. The sound of a voice shifting from denial to explanation. He understands now that some cases never truly leave you, not because they are unresolved, but because they reveal something fundamental about time and responsibility. Karen's case taught him that attention itself can be an act of justice. In another part of the city, a young investigator opens a file marked inactive, not because protocol demands it, but because something about the handwriting on the label feels unfinished. There is no dramatic reason, no intuition worthy of a headline. Just a quiet discomfort with letting time make decisions unchecked. This is how legacies actually move forward, not through inspiration, but through unease. Karen's name surfaces less and less, but when it does, it is spoken carefully. In training rooms, it is paired with reminders about humility. In academic texts, it appears in footnotes that argue for patience. In private conversations, it emerges as shorthand for a truth many find difficult to accept, that justice is not automatic and silence is not neutral. These references are small, but they accumulate, shaping behavior in ways no verdict ever could. Her family continues living in a world that no longer asks them to explain themselves. The case has stopped intruding on their grief. They have reclaimed the right to remember Karen without context, without explanation. On birthdays and holidays, they speak of her preferences, her habits, the way she laughed at her own jokes. The crime does not disappear, but it recedes, no longer occupying the center of every memory. This is not closure. It is balance. The man who killed her becomes less a presence than a fact, contained, defined, no longer capable of shaping the narrative. His story collapses inward, losing relevance with each passing year. This, too, is a form of justice, not dramatic, not redemptive, but corrective. The story no longer bends around him. Berlin absorbs all of this without comment. The city has survived larger traumas, longer silences, deeper divisions. It knows how to carry weight without acknowledging it directly. Streets fill. Buildings rise. Generations overlap. And still, beneath that motion, the lesson persists, that the past is not passive, that it responds when pressed, that it waits for the moment someone is willing to look again. Cold cases are often described as puzzles, but Karen's case proves they're something else entirely. They are negotiations with time. They test whether a society believes truth has an expiration date. They ask whether memory is a burden or a responsibility. In 1982, Berlin did not have the tools, the language, or the patience to answer those questions fully. Decades later, it tried again. The answer was imperfect, incomplete, too late to save a life. But it was an answer nonetheless, and answers matter, even when they arrive after the damage is done. Especially then. As night settles once more over the city, windows glowing sporadically, footsteps echoing briefly before fading, Berlin continues forward, carrying its stories the way it always has, layered, unresolved, alive. Somewhere, an old silence has been replaced by a quieter truth. Not loud enough to comfort, not sharp enough to shock, but solid enough to endure. The cold case no longer demands attention. It has already done its work. What remains is the understanding it left behind, that time can hide the truth, but it cannot protect it forever, and that somewhere between forgetting and remembering lies a responsibility that never fully disappears, no matter how many years pass, no matter how deep the silence once was. Even after everything that can be said has been said, the story continues to breathe on its own, faint but